The Tampa Bay Lightning hope to end the month of January on a high note when they finish off the month with a home date against the Los Angeles Kings. We'll break that one down and go through some trade deadline scenarios on today's episode of Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another episode of Locked On Lightning. I'm Josh Sperber, thanking all of you for making Locked On Lightning your first listen every day. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And if your team is the Tampa Bay Lightning, then this is the show for you. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off of your first purchase. And we'll first get started with the Lightning date against the Los Angeles Kings. Second time they have played this month, final time they will play this season. And the last time they played was in Los Angeles. Victor Hedman scored a goal within the first 2 minutes of the game. And then the Kings tied it a little bit later on in the first period. About halfway through the third, Adrian Kempe finished things up for the Kings, putting in a snapshot to make it 2-1 and eventually seal the win for Los Angeles. Now, this was another game where the Lightning outshot their opponent by a pretty significant margin, 34-21. And they outshot the Kings in every single period, including an 11-4 margin in the opening period, where the Kings still ended up tying the score. And, you know, I feel like we've talked about this a lot just because, there's kind of been a theme of the whole month. Braden Point was talking about it after the game on Tuesday, as was the head coach, John Cooper, about how the Lightning are getting their chances. They're just not falling right now. And, at some point that's going to switch. I mean, at some point when the shots just keep coming, eventually they're going to just start going in. And that's just something the Lightning just can't get discouraged about. They need to just keep on shooting and keep trying to put the puck in the net. This is another game where the power play is going to really make a big difference. This is the fifth best power play percentage in the league with the Lightning at 27, and a measly 15% for the LA Kings on their power play, 29th in the league. But their penalty kill is slightly better than the Lightning, 2 spots in the league. I mean, these are two teams that look relatively evenly matched when you go down the board and look at stats. But the Kings are a much more defensive-minded team. I mean, you look at their defensive stats compared to their offensive ones. Their power play is 29th in the league. Their penalty kill is 8th. They average the 23rd most goals for per game, but they allow the 5th fewest goals allowed per game. Darcy Kemper likely to be in net for LA. He's a guy who's been there and done it. Some of the Lightning have seen plenty. But still, obviously, a really solid goalie. One of the few goalies you'll see with better averages than Vasilevsky. Goal allows average of 2.17 and save percentage of 921 with the same amount of shutouts as Vazzy, as in 2 for Darcy Kemper. But right now, this is a Kings team that is competing in a very tough division. They're third behind Vegas and Edmonton in the Pacific, 2 games in hand and 2 points ahead of the Vancouver Canucks. So LA is in a really solid position right now. But they have the Flames knocking right on the door. Flames have played just one more game than Los Angeles and have 3 fewer points in 5th in the division behind the Vancouver Canucks. Of course, if you've watched any Locked On NHL shows, we've talked plenty about what's going on with the Canucks. So the Kings are in a good spot for playoffs, but and they only have a couple more points than the Lightning, who, again, need this win just to stay in pace. And it's still slimmest of margins in the Atlantic Division as well. 1 point separates the Lightning in fifth and the Senators in third. Tied on points, but with 2 games in hand over the Boston Bruins are Ottawa. And again, next week, Tuesday and Thursday, the Senators are going to be in Amalie Arena for 2 huge divisional matchups. So I know they're going to be keeping an eye on this game as well. And this is an important kind of precursor for the Lightning. They do have the Islanders next of the homestand. The Islanders do have the fewest points of any team, 51, but still with a winning record. I mean, the Metropolitan Division looks really solid this year. But that's another game you'd hope the Lightning win. I mean, but these are, you got to really think of these games as sort of, precursors almost, tune-ups, preludes, whatever you want to call it, to those Senators games, because those are the focal point. They have to be the focal point of this homestand for the Tampa Bay Lightning. They just have to. You got to put extra emphasis, I think, on divisional games at this point in the year, especially, I think, when the Lightning, have lost a couple. It's been kind of an up and down month in January, I think, with more downs than ups in terms of the schedule. And you still have your most important games to come. You got to just shake off the losses and try and, get back in the groove. And the Lightning are really good at when they need a win, especially at home, they usually get it. It was a rare miss from the Lightning following up the Red Wings shutout with a 1-goal performance. But, obviously everything on offense is going to be key for the Lightning. I think that's something that it is not even needed to be said, because the Lightning are just such a strong offensive team, but they've still scored 1 goal in the last 2 games, despite shooting almost 70 times. And I certainly expect an onslaught of shots from the Lightning. And it's just a matter of the goals needing to come in. It was a 2-1 loss for the Lightning against the Kings the last time. As I mentioned, 34-21 on shots for the Lightning. And that is honestly just reminiscent of the entire month, really, for the Lightning. Just outshooting their opponent, getting the looks that they want on offense. Just the goalies are keeping them out. Coach Cooper mentioned that the Lightning have been making some opposing goalies lately look like a Vezina candidate, just with the amount of saves that they're making. Obviously, that's something that they need to change. I mean, you could really feel the frustration in the locker room after the game. It was never, I don't think it had ever been more silent in there. And it's just because of the fact that the Lightning were able to do what they wanted on offense in terms of get their looks, get their shots, but they just didn't fall. And that, it just made it another loss just that much more crushing, even if it was a 3-goal loss. That was another game the Lightning were in the lead of against the Blackhawks back on Tuesday. And, the Lightning did exactly what you'd want them to do. They got out to a fast start. They got the first goal. They had a lead after that opening period. And it just kind of fell apart after that. And the Blackhawks were getting their shots. They were getting them in. And now that kind of energy just needs to be with the Lightning against the Kings. I mean, this is a tough Western Conference team that the Lightning played every step with the last time they played each other. They had the early lead. They got the opening goal, but they just couldn't hang on. And, I mean, the Kings are a tough team to battle against. They're a defensive, just kind of grind you out team. And the Lightning are going to have to counter that with just some gritty offense. It's going to be the last game of Emil Lilleberg's suspension, so I expect Declan Carlisle to stay in the lineup. But, they need someone to replace Lilleberg in terms of that, in that physicality. And that is going to be the main topic of our next segment, because the Lightning are missing two defenders right now who could be very helpful in this stretch run. One will be back likely on the 1st of February. The other, there's less consensus on when JJ Moser is coming back. So we'll talk about what the Lightning miss with JJ Moser and Emil Lilleberg currently sidelined. Attending NFL playoff games is an unforgettable experience that brings families together. I remember the excitement and energy of the Bucs-Eagles playoff game that I attended last year, and I'm looking forward to making new memories this season. Game Time has a feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for events even easier. It filters out the fluff to only show you incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. I recently used Game Time Picks to find tickets for the Bucs playoff game that they hosted a couple weeks ago, and it was really easy to browse through the deals, simple, and I found great value for all sorts of seats around the venue. The Super Deal was especially impressive, offering the best value for the event. The app's features like seat views before you buy and all-in pricing with no surprise fees at checkout made the experience smooth and reliable. Plus, the on-time ticket delivery and lowest price guarantee gave me peace of mind. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. The Tampa Bay Lightning are currently missing two of their primary defenders, Emil Lilleberg, who typically plays on the third line with Nick Perbix, and JJ Moser, one of their big offseason acquisitions, who is typically the starting line one defender with the captain, Victor Hedman. Moser has been out since December. Lilleberg will serve the second of his two-game suspension against the Los Angeles Kings for an interference penalty committed against the Red Wings in Detroit last week. And we'll start with Emil Lilleberg because, I think just because of that recent game against the Blackhawks just made it a little bit more obvious in the ways the Lightning were missing Lilleberg, and that is the physicality. He is just a hit magnet for the Tampa Bay Lightning and has been a leader in that category for Tampa for most of the season. He is... I think the enforcer position is certainly not what it was, when I was growing up, but he's the closest thing to an enforcer I think the Lightning have. There have been a couple times where he's gotten into a fight that has charged up the team, made nice hits, because that's what Lilleberg does. He brings the pain. He's a really physical defender who can still make an impact on offense as well. That's definitely not his game, but the Norseman has 11 assists in 45 games for the Lightning this season. Does lead the team in penalty minutes with 76 for a couple fights. He has certainly been in the most fights of any member of the Tampa Bay Lightning. The penalty minutes obviously aren't great, but there's got to be someone that is willing to defend the team. And oftentimes that means actually and physically, with fists. So that has certainly been missed. And you saw it against the Blackhawks. The Lightning were out hit 17-11 by a team that isn't that physical. And it, without Lilleberg there were times where the Lightning just kind of looked a little bit, I don't want to say scared, but they weren't, the players just aren't as willing to get physical. Obviously in that Blackhawks game, there were some examples otherwise, like Victor Hedman stepping to Pat Maroon after Maroon drew a penalty, former teammates going at it. But even that was pretty short and wasn't even a fight. It was more just Hedman literally stepping in front of Maroon, who was kind of going after another member of the Lightning, just being like, enough, you used to play for us, like, relax. Um, but I think if Lilleberg was there, Maroon would have touched ice. That's just kind of what he brings to the table. I mean, he's certainly not a dirty player, I'd say, by any means, but he's not afraid to throw his weight around and just mix it up with anyone else in the league. I mean, there's no one that he's too afraid to stare down, and I think the Lightning have certainly missed that over these last few games. Well, in the last game, and you're hoping that they don't miss the extra physicality tonight. They certainly found some ways to get around it. I mean, you've still got guys like Eric Chernak and Ryan McDonough who are, strong, willing to mix it up with anybody. So it's certainly tougher without your most physical player, but I think the Lightning did their best in working around it against Chicago, and they're going to have to make it work against another pretty physical team in the LA Kings. But they're still going to have to do that without JJ Moser, who has been practicing pretty consistently with the Lightning since his injury. He has not played since September 12th and is not expected to until around the Four Nations break. There is optimism that he can come back before the Four Nations break, ideally for one of those games against the Senators. Obviously would be ideal, but I certainly haven't heard anything to give me any kind of indication that he's going to be back before the Four Nations break. So in all honesty, I'm operating under the assumption that February 23rd against the Kraken is the earliest that we'll see JJ Moser back. I mean, it's obviously a great sign to see him practicing, but there's been no more news about if he's going to come back to the Lightning anytime soon. But it's been pretty evident that he's left a hole in the Lightning's defense. He had a +13, 2 goals and 8 assists through his first 27 games as a Bolt. Doesn't spend much time in the penalty box. I mean, enough of a threat on offense, but is still going to be back on defense every time. I mean, he's one of the faster skaters among Lightning defensemen for sure. And, he's not afraid to get involved on the offensive side, but can still be strong with his quickness on defense as well. And I think he's a really good compliment, I think, to Victor Hedman, who is, obviously a bigger defender, and his speed isn't exactly his calling card. So Moser has a little bit of extra recovery speed. I mean, I'm not saying Hedman's a poor or a slow skater by any means, because he's not, but Moser's just that much faster that if Hedman can't recover in time, or if he gets beat, Moser's going to have an easier time getting over there to try and help him out, and you help the Lightning, just help the Lightning recover and just keep pace on defense if somebody else gets beat. I mean, time and time again, you'll see Moser be the last man standing when it comes to the Lightning defender to still get to the puck before the opponent can get a shot off. And his offensive ability is as good as anyone on the Lightning's defense. His defensive ability is certainly up there as well. He was a big target in that Mikhail Sergachev trade. When you're trading your second highest scoring defenseman ever, you're going to want to get someone back who is NHL ready and ready to make an impact at the highest level in the game. And that's certainly what JJ Moser has done. He had been, a pretty well-used player for Arizona over the past couple of years. To start his career, played all but 2 games in the last 2 seasons for the Coyotes, averaging over 20 minutes of ice time as well. So, I mean, he's no stranger to getting a lot of game time, and I think the Lightning are going to have to ease him back. The fact they have a strong complement of defenders in Syracuse, just to kind of spell him a little bit, I'd imagine that they'll go 11-7 when Moser's back, but you can tell that his speed and his ability to recover has been missed on defense for Tampa, and the same thing with Lilleberg's physicality. Fortunately, Lilleberg will be back once the Lightning return to their own conference on Saturday with a game against the Islanders. And Moser, less news on that, but we'll keep trying to find that out for you guys. But it is the time of year where the trade deadline is approaching. Trade discussions, rumors, everything has been heating up, and the Tampa Bay Lightning are certainly involved. There has been some speculation whether or not the Lightning will just fully move into the rebuild after Steven Stamkos, or if they're going to go for it and try to really contend this year in the playoffs. I certainly have my thoughts, and you'll hear them right after this. So it is deadline time, something that we've talked about here and there on this show, because the Lightning certainly haven't made any indications one way or another if they're going to be buyers or sellers, or if they're just going to stand pat and stick with a team that they have. I personally think that the Lightning should be buyers. They're honestly a team in perfect buying position. With their games in hand, they do have the inside edge on the Senators and the Bruins. They have one game in hand against Ottawa and play them twice next week, and 3 games in hand on the Bruins, with just 1 point behind both of those teams. And I certainly think that, just being in that position in any sport, the buyers of the trade deadline are the teams that are in the thick of the playoff race, but kind of teetering on the edge. I think the Lightning are definitely more of an in the bubble rather than just outside of the bubble kind of playoff team. I think the Lightning do have an inside edge over the rest of the teams in that division, aside from Toronto and Florida, when it comes to making the playoffs right now. But, there have been some injuries that the Lightning are still kind of dealing with. And there's definitely, I think, been signs that the depth isn't how you want it. I think the two trade candidates I think the Lightning have been linked with the most are Ivan Provorov of the Columbus Blue Jackets, who has been one of the most popular names mentioned in trade rumors, even with the Blue Jackets having a surprisingly resurgent season. And now Provorov might not be on the trade block. Columbus is in playoff position with 3 points over the New York Rangers for that 4th spot in the Metropolitan Division. And at 55 points, they're tied on points with the Lightning as well for that last wild card spot. And the Rangers are certainly knocking on the door. I think the Rangers are going to end up coming back to themselves and overtake the Columbus Blue Jackets. But it might not be in time for the trade deadline for Columbus to deal Provorov, who I think would be a good option for the Lightning. Brock Boeser of the Vancouver Canucks is a name that was mentioned, which I'm a little skeptical about because I think the Canucks have enough problems right now with the reported feud between Elias Pettersson and JT Miller. So, I mean, there are some options. I think a forward might be the best move for Tampa, getting a more experienced forward for some of their bottom 6 lines. But it still begs the question, looking up and down the Lightning roster, looking at some of their prospects, who the Lightning trade, plain and simple. And that is what we're here to talk about. Lightning have already made one trade, giving up Lucas Edmonds for Ryder Korzak in a trade with the New York Rangers. But I mean, if you look at the roster, there are some guys I think that are currently on the active roster for Tampa that could potentially be on the move. You've seen a number of defensemen for the Tampa get called up: Carlisle, Santini, and Crozier. And I think of those guys, Crozier is definitely the most NHL ready, I think, of the Lightning defensemen. Declan Carlisle is certainly a possibility there as well. And those guys are both 24, 25 years old. So those are certainly players that if the Lightning had to part ways with defensemen, those might be guys on the list. But then you might look at a guy like Derek Pulio if it's if it's a contending team that's looking for a last piece, and he's one of the highest scoring defensemen in the AHL right now. Obviously, some of those kind of teams, the contending teams might be looking for a younger defenseman, as Pulio is in his early 30s, but he's still someone that could be dealt to the right team. I think that's a bit less likely. Jesse Lonen is another really intriguing name because he's someone who I think could honestly factor on the Lightning roster right now. But there are just some guys in front of him, and I think the Lightning really like Gage Gonzalez. But again, you got to think that he and Asimont are two players on the trading block. I think Asimont a little bit less likely. He's a bit older. Gonzalez is 24 in his first NHL season, and I think that if you look at the Lightning's active roster, he's probably the most attractive trade piece that Tampa has. A lower line guy. Cam Atkinson can come in and play where Gonzalez usually does, and there's certainly some younger guys like Ilonen, maybe not Connor Sheary in terms of being a younger guy, but there are guys that I think could come up and in place of Gonzalez, like Ilonen, like maybe Nico Huhtinen, who's certainly another potential trade candidate for Tampa. But and if you compare Lightning's farm system to the rest of the NHL's, it's not a bad farm system. I don't want to say that, but it's not. It doesn't match the level of the Lightning. I think the Tampa Bay Lightning the Tampa Bay Lightning is a team in the NHL have a better record than their farm system. The Crunch are towards the bottom of their division in the AHL. Currently fifth in the North Division through 41 games. And they are 6 points out of fourth place in that North Division. So, that doesn't mean that Lightning just have bad players in their farm system, because they certainly have some younger guys that deserve a look from some of the other teams. You look at guys like Gabriel Sturck as well, some of their younger players, Milo Rollins, Max Groshev, who has been great for the Lightning in a couple of preseasons, Jack Finley, who came up. But I think the Lightning's farm system is certainly on the up and up. I'd think that they might have to trade, a Gage Gonzalez or a Michael Asimont or someone on their active roster to get some of the players that they're looking for. Like if you go for a Brock Boeser, I'd be surprised if Gage Gonzalez isn't in the deal. And there's definitely going to be some tough decisions if they needed to trade a defender for a guy like Ivan Provorov. I think guys like Carlisle or Crozier could be traded. I think the Lightning would like to keep Crozier, especially, a homegrown guy that they drafted who is really just, one or two people in the lineup. He's really the next man up. I mean, I think if the Lightning had to take just one defender from their farm system, I think Crozier has already played more than any other defender who has come up from Syracuse. When Chernak was injured, he came up for those 5 games. Carlisle is expected to play his 3rd game of the season. He is second in terms of Lightning defenseman. Toby Puckhead-Selin, another young defenseman that I think potentially could be on the trading block. I mean, but again, this is all speculation, really. You never really know if the Lightning are even going to trade. There certainly haven't been any major indications that they're looking to make a big move. But I think that, getting a solid rotational player, like a top 9 forward or a top, 4 defenseman, I think would certainly help the Lightning as they try and close the gap between them and the rest of their division, and just try and keep pace and work for a playoff spot. But hopefully the Lightning will take a step closer to that if they get a win over the Kings tonight. We'll break all that down in tomorrow's episode. But until then, I want to thank all of you for making Locked On Lightning your first listen every day. And for your second listen, make sure to check out Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert and get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from Steal and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube, please give us a like, a follow, a subscribe. We really appreciate your guys' support because we do this podcast for you. So thanks again for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Lightning. I'm Josh Sperber, and let's go Bolts. Have a great day, everybody.